My intention with this channel was to bring you old stories that most may not know much about, or in my case, know anything about, and we all learn a bit. In turn, I wasn't going to really go too much into more famous cases. Bonnie and Clyde, pretty famous duo, but I've never seen the movie with Faye Dunaway and Warren Beatty, and I only know really what ended up happening to them, not how they got there. So we're going to do a little something different, do a little puddle dive on a more famous case just to see what the backstory was, how they got to the part of their story where they became famous, and what the newspapers of the day were saying. Clyde Chestnut Champion Barrow was born March 24, 1909. Bonnie Elizabeth Parker was born October 1st, 1910, both born in Texas. When everything went down, the part that probably most of us know about was in May 1934. So let's hit rewind before we get to that. Clyde Barrow would become known as the Southwest United States' public enemy number one, believed to have been involved in at least a dozen murders. 1926 is when his involvement with crime seems to have started when he got arrested in Dallas, Texas for stealing a car. By 1930, he got caught up on burglary and theft charges and would be sentenced to a penitentiary in Texas for 14 years. But in 1932, Governor Ross Sterling granted Clyde parole. And rather than taking that moment to think, wow, I can turn my life around, I can make my life something different now that I have this chance. No, he wouldn't do that because then we wouldn't be here. Take note that in 1926, when he stole a car, he was 16. When he got imprisoned, he was 20. I think that's one of the things I didn't really remember about them, that they were relatively young when this was all going down. Now, it wasn't always Bonnie and Clyde. Clyde had a sort of gang of sorts, mainly doing stuff with his brother Marvin and various other hangers-on that happened to be about sometimes, usually only like 2 or 3 people. So why after getting out on parole did he continue to break the law? Because it was said that he hated the law, hated police officers, hated any law enforcement, and when provoked, he had no problem unleashing all holy hell on them. Remember, in early 1932, he was released on parole by the governor. Supposedly, he had been sentenced to hard labor and cut his foot with an axe, or had another prisoner to do it. He may have had at least 2 toes cut off, but was paroled a mere 6 days later, likely assisted in getting that by his mother to the governor. Shame about your toes, dude. April 30th, 1932. Murdered J.W. Busher, a gas station attendant in Hillsboro, Texas. It was late at night. A knock on the door awakened Mr. Busher. He recognized the youngsters. Clyde was one of the 2, and the guys wanted guitar strings. Busher let them in, and the second he did, the guys drew guns and they shot him down in front of his wife. They got $40 in cash and $2,500 in jewelry. Mrs. Bouchard identified the pair as Clyde and Raymond Hamilton, who we'll hear a lot about over the coming years. Now, they were murderers. August 5th, 1932. Murdered Deputy Sheriff E.C. Moore in Atoka, Oklahoma. December 25th, 1932. Killed Doyle Johnson in Temple, Texas. Originally, another man was arrested and charged with this murder, but we'll speak later about what happened with that. January 7th, 1933. Killed Deputy Sheriff Malcolm Davis in Dallas. April 13th, 1933. Killed Constable J.W. Wes Harriman and Detective Harry McGinnis in Joplin, Missouri. These 2 officers were in a gunfight with 2 men, allegedly Clyde Barrow and his brother Marvin, with who was said to probably be Bonnie in the car. Harriman fell dead after the first exchange of bullets. McGinnis would die of his wounds. Clyde, Marvin, and probably Bonnie escaped in a car. After searching the house where this took place, the officers found a pardon issued in March 1933 by then Texas Governor Ma Ferguson and made out to Barrow, which led officers to believe that the 2 men were Clyde and Marvin, who went by the nickname Buck. When the officers at the home called into Dallas, Dallas had said the Barrow brothers were wanted in Texas on highway robbery charges. Also in the house were 5 diamonds, perhaps part of the stolen goods of a $1,500 robbery in Neosho, Missouri that had happened recently. Also found were several weapons, including an automatic rifle. June 23, 1933. Killed Marshall Henry Humphrey in Van Buren, Arkansas. July 24, 1933. 5 people, 3 men and 2 women, had been holed up in the woods near Dexter, Iowa for 5 days. A local farmer had been out looking for blackberries when he found bandages with bloodstains and alerted police. This was because Marvin, Clyde's brother, had been wounded in the head in Platte City. Workers in a local restaurant were suspicious when a man came several days in a row to pick up 5 dinners. Dexter, Iowa would report that Marvin and Marvin's wife were captured by police after a gun battle with state and county officers. Marvin was not expected to survive. The other 2 men thought to be part of the battle were Clyde Barrow and Jack Sherman, which was maybe an alias, along with an unnamed woman, I'm going to assume Bonnie. Clyde and Jack, along with the woman, fled away in a car. A Polk County deputy sheriff was injured. Near Marvin and his wife were 2 machine guns, 34 automatic 45s. 34 of them? I think that's a newspaper typo. And 5 revolvers. Clyde, Jack, and the woman would abandon their car in Polk City, hold up an oil station attendant, and head to Des Moines in the attendant's car. Somewhere along the way, it was said they had dropped off the woman. Meanwhile, an airplane flown by Park Finley, head of the State Bureau of Investigation, was helping in the search for the 3 escapees. Marvin, injured in 2 different gun battles, would die of an infection to a head wound. He had lapsed into a coma and never woke up. November 22, 1933. Clyde and Bonnie got caught up in a trap set by law enforcement and gunfire hailed on them. But they escaped, as they were also firing their own weapons. They abandoned their own car, riddled with bullet holes and decorated with blood splotches, and managed to steal another when they had gotten far enough away from the original gun battle, out of firing range. The car they stole was that of 2 Fort Worth attorneys, Thomas James and Paul Reich, who were coming back from a reunion get-together of sorts in Dallas. Barrow swerved his car in front of the attorney car, leaped out of the car along with Bonnie, and ordered the men to get out. Said Attorney James, quote, "I guess we were a little slow to suit them. The man fired into the window twice, and he and the girl both gave us a cussin'," end quote. Shards of window glass would cut the attorneys, but they did get out. While that was happening, another car drove up to render aid. The man getting out, and Clyde shot at the ground at this guy's feet. He, of course, as anyone would, got back in his car and skedaddled. Clyde and Bonnie got in the attorney car and headed in the direction of Dallas, firing at various cars that approached the scene. One car that recognized them happened to be carrying police officers. The officers saw it was Clyde, fired their submachine gun at Clyde's car, which was going like 25 miles an hour. Barrow fired back, sped off. The officers had already parked their car to try to do some sort of trap, but it didn't work, so they had to call up Dallas. Now, at this point in this article, they're saying it's believed that Clyde and Bonnie are married. No. Bonnie is actually married to another man, one Roy Thornton, who is a bad boy himself. Bonnie has a type. I believe that Bonnie and Thornton got married quite young, then got separated. He's in prison, she's out shooting up stuff, and never the twain shall meet again. But no, they were not divorced, and she wasn't practicing bigamy with Clyde. November 25th, 1933. W.D. Jones, 17, would spill his guts to the police, telling all about Clyde's killings, robberies, gun battles, saying he was the unwilling partner in the adventure of Clyde and Bonnie. Quote, "I don't want to get out of jail. If I should and Clyde Barrow met me, he would let me have it." End quote. Jones was caught with regards to the January 1933 killing of Deputy Sheriff Malcolm Davis. He also, thankfully for one Frank Hardy, who had been arrested for the murder of Doyle Johnson December 1932, would set that record straight. Now, Hardy had already been acquitted by a jury just the week before, but it's good to finally get that murder resolved. Well, sort of. We don't have Clyde in our clutches yet. Now, in addition to the murders already discussed, Jones would mention an undertaker and a woman had been kidnapped in August in Ruston, Louisiana. Sheriff George Corey and City Marshal Paul Hardy in Wellington, Texas had been kidnapped June 11th and released near Eric, Oklahoma. Jones would continue, quote, Clyde only kept me with him to drive the car and keep a lookout. Mostly I was a lookout, and when trouble happened, it was my job to get the car started so we could make a quick getaway. I sure hope they catch the Barrows, for if I ever get out of this jam, I will be afraid to be seen anywhere unless the Barrows are locked up, end quote. Jones had escaped from Clyde in Louisiana. Then he spent time dodging the police and dodging Clyde. He had been arrested in Houston November 15th. Jones, quote, from what I saw and what Clyde and Buck Barrow have told me, I know they have killed at least 6 men, and I don't know how many more I don't know about, end quote. Jones had met Bonnie and Clyde nearly a year earlier, while he was with L.C. Barrow, another Barrow brother, and he got into Clyde's car to ride into Dallas and claims he was virtually their prisoner for months. They had driven to Temple, and when he refused to help rob a store, Clyde called him a coward, quote, and Bonnie laughed at me because I was afraid, end quote. He wanted to go back to Dallas. Clyde pointed to a car on a street in Temple and told him to go on home in that car. Clyde stopped the car they were riding in and ordered Jones to get into the parked car. Quote, I did. And about that time, a woman came out of the house and started screaming. I started to run, but Clyde told me to get back in the car and start it, end quote. Then an older man came out of the house. Clyde waved his pistol at the man, and Clyde got into the parked car to start it. Jones continued, quote, another and younger man came out of the house and up to the car on the side where Clyde was sitting. Clyde raised his pistol and fired 3 times. I did not see the man fall, but started running, end quote. So much for stealing the parked car. Jones then made a statement regarding the killing of Deputy Malcolm Davis in January. They had gone to the home of Lily McBride, Raymond Hamilton's sister. Now we know Raymond, childhood friend of Clyde, with him the first murder of Mr. Butcher. They wanted information on Hamilton to see about helping him escape prison. But I'm not sure how Deputy Davis came to be there or got killed. January 16, 1934. Killed Major Crowson, a guard at the Huntsville State Prison in Huntsville, Texas, Eastham Prison Farm. Another guard had been wounded, Olin Bozeman. This was when Barrow freed Raymond Hamilton, convicted killer and bank robber, and 4 other convicts from prison. Hamilton had been in prison for a 263-year sentence. The guards had taken the prisoners out to work in the fields. As the squad of people passed, Bonnie and Clyde sprayed bullets out from the ditch they had been hiding in. The 2 guards hit immediately. Hamilton and 4 other convicts sprinted to the nearby car and took off. The other guards and convicts, unhurt and unescaped, identified the man with the machine gun as Clyde Barrow. The escapees, along with Hamilton, were Henry Methvin, 10 years, Joe Palmer, 25 years, W.H. Bybee, life sentence, and J.B. French, 13 years. As mentioned, Major Crowson would succumb to his injuries, but before he had been operated on, he would say, quote, the break happened at 7 a.m. Bozeman had taken a squad of 17 men to the woods, but they had not yet begun work. I asked Bozeman to tell a captain to take Raymond Hamilton back into the squad where he belonged. Hamilton then went into Bozeman's squad. Palmer, one of the convicts, approached Bozeman and, producing a pistol, said, stick 'em up, boys. Palmer then shot me in the abdomen. He turned and fired at Bozeman, who was on a horse, but missed. Bozeman returned the fire, but also missed, and Palmer then shot him in the hip. At that time, those in a ditch nearby raised up and began firing a machine gun. Convicts ran everywhere, end quote. So how was this pre-planned? Lee Simmons, general manager of the Texas prison system. Quote, 3 pistols had been planted in a brush pile where the convicts were clearing some timber. The convicts evidently had been told that these pistols would be planted because they knew where to look for them. As the convicts reached work, one of them, Joe Palmer, dived into a pile of brush and came out with a .45 automatic pistol in his hand. He let go with it right away. 2 other convicts also dived into the brush and came out with the same kind of guns. The air was full of whistling bullets in a minute. Palmer cut loose at Bozeman and dropped him with a bullet through his hip. Another shot knocked his shotgun out of his hand. Bozeman drew his gun and emptied it at Palmer. Clausen went down with a bullet in his stomach. About that time, the weeds at the edge of a big drainage ditch nearby moved, and 2 men rose up. One had a machine gun in his hand and the other an automatic pistol. They opened fire, but none of their bullets seemed to take effect. When the first shots were fired, the guards yelled at the convicts to lay down, and the machine gun bullets seemed to have been fired to scare them. Clausen and Bozeman were lying on the ground bleeding, and all around them lay convicts huddling close to the earth to escape the bullets. Then Palmer and 4 others in the squad made a dash for the ditch. They jumped into it, scrambled up on the other side, and ran towards a car parked on the road back of the farm. Someone in the car had been honking the horn all during the shooting. The car was a black roadster with a rumble seat. The men climbed upon it, and the driver roared away in the direction of Lovelady. End quote. Apparently the fog was also very thick that morning, helping to disguise all. Posses in effect, searching for Barrow and crew in the piney woods and Neches River bottoms, but nothing. Tips came in, but proved fruitless. Dallas investigators would say that Huntsville officials were warned at least twice that Hamilton was planning something and would resort to murder if it came to that. Sheriff Schmid of Dallas would say that when he told the prison officials that, he was laughed at. That prison officials believed Hamilton to be, quote, as gentle as a male manicurist, end quote. One of the 5 prisoners, J.B. French, was somehow recaptured and already back to work on the prison farm. Barrow and Hamilton have a history of petty crimes as youngsters, eventually graduating to carrying guns and going after moolah and then more and worse stuff. January 31st. Another escapee, W.H. Bybee, was captured thanks to a 22-year-old hitchhiker named Evelyn. She was ready to hitchhike on home back to L.A., but was scrutinizing her potential drivers carefully. Well, Bybee had picked her up in Veneta, Oklahoma, taking turns driving until they reached Vega, Texas. It wasn't said what happened, but Evelyn, once they got to Vega, gave him the slip. Somehow she had managed to drive off in the car they had been driving in from a filling station. Bybee stole a truck and tried to overtake her, but somehow, the newspaper doesn't quite say how, she was able to alert police officers and Bybee was captured. April 1st, 1934. Killed E.W. Wheeler and Texas Highway Patrolman H.D. Murphy near Grapevine, Texas. $1,500 reward is out for the capture of the killers. $1,000 from the chief of the State Highway Patrol, L.G. Ferris, for the, quote, apprehension and convictions or for the dead bodies, end quote, of the killers. Governor Ma Ferguson would post $500 reward each for Clyde and Raymond Hamilton, dead or alive. Ferris, quote, these were the first patrolmen to be shot and killed. Their fellow patrolmen will use every effort and never quit the job until the merciless killer is caught. But that type of bandit has every advantage over law officers. Something has to be done to prevent a recurrence of Sunday's shooting. The State Highway Patrol will do everything in its power to prevent it by catching the murderers, end quote. Along with that, they apparently drove up to a filling station at Blanket, 10 miles northwest of Brownwood, stole a tank of gasoline from Howard Strickland, a night watchman, and dashed away as Strickland fired at them. Hamilton was supposedly the robber of a bank in West earlier, kidnapped a Mrs. Cam Gunter in Mejia just after that, and stole a car in Houston the next morning after they released Mrs. Gunter. It's believed Hamilton did these things separate from Clyde, but they plan to meet up later. For those of you who know about John Dillinger, whom I've heard of but don't know a lot about, all of this ruckus is all going on about the same time as John Dillinger's ruckus. April 6, 1934. Killed Constable Cal Campbell in Miami, Oklahoma. He had also kidnapped Percy Boyd, chief of police in Commerce, Oklahoma, but released Boyd 14 hours later somewhere near Fort Scott, Kansas. The 2 law officers were investigating the actions of 2 men and a woman who had gotten their car stuck in a mud hole. Clyde shot Campbell with a machine gun, forced Boyd into their car. Boyd had a scalp wound and was positive as to the identification of Clyde and Bonnie and believed the other man with them to be Raymond Hamilton. Another paper said maybe Henry Methvin, one of the Huntsville escapees. Amongst them, they had 3 machine guns, 3 shotguns, several pistols, suitcase full of ammunition. He admitted they treated him well, helped him bandage his wound, gave him a clean shirt to replace his bloodied shirt. Boyd would say, quote, Barrow and his companions have no fear of being captured. They think they are too smart to be caught. He thinks quite a lot of himself. Bonnie is a lot like him, but she thinks quite a lot of Barrow. You can tell that. They said they were sorry they had to shoot Campbell, but they kept joking about it all afternoon. End quote. Boyd would say that Bonnie told him she was not a cigar smoker as she had been portrayed in the media. The picture of her smoking a cigar was, I guess, a joke. Boyd says she also had a white rabbit she carried with her as a pet, and frequently while he was kidnapped and in the car with them, she would reach into the back of the car to feed her rabbit a carrot. Bonnie, let the poor rabbit go. If he or she is anything like my cat in a car, it ain't a good situation. April 9th. Clyde's abandoned car with 2 bullet holes in the windshield was found near Ottawa, Kansas. 100 miles away had released Boyd. Hamilton allegedly forwarded a letter to a Dallas lawyer saying he's had nothing to do with Clyde's activities since the $4,000 robbery in Texas on February 27th. So, if this letter is true, it's probably then Henry Methvin with Clyde, not Hamilton. Hamilton, quote, I want to let the public and the whole world know I am not with Clyde Barrow and don't go his speed. I'm a one man and intend to stay that way, end quote. Well, good for you. April 10th, Clyde's dad, Henry Barrow, has disclosed that Clyde is writing a book. Quote, he has arranged to have it published. It will be a good story, too, for Clyde has been over the road the past few years. End quote. Over the road? Yeah, you could call it that. Remember when Clyde's car got stuck in a mud hole? A note was found near the car that said, quote, B gang is known for nearly every major crime in 2 years, end quote. And, quote, the law can be mistaken. I believe we are innocent, end quote. Clyde's mother would say, quote, I guess he did that, and he did the Huntsville thing, and maybe the Lancaster robbery, but he didn't kill those 2 officers near Grapevine, end quote. Well, Ma, that's okay then. April 26th. Missing Raymond Hamilton. He was caught in Sherman, Texas, trying to escape with what he had stolen from a small bank. It wouldn't be long before it was recommended that Hamilton be put in an electric chair. Remember, he had already been sentenced to 263 years in prison before he escaped. May 13th. Periodically, members of the Barrow and Parker families are being questioned by police here and there, assuming at some point that either someone knows something, that someone has helped them hide or something, that Clyde and Bonnie will at some point visit. Police questioned Clyde's mother, who was all about her baby boy, for like 2 nights and a day, but sent her back home to West Dallas. Even after she intimated that she had answered all of their questions except, quote, if it would give away where Clyde was located, end quote. Oh, okay. Mrs. Barrow would say, quote, they asked me if I had seen Clyde, and I told them I had on numerous occasions since he got out of the penitentiary 3 years ago. They asked me if I had seen him last Mother's Day, and I told them I had talked with him at Cedar Hill, a small community in the southern part of Dallas County. No, I'm not going to see him this time. When they asked me whether I had any intentions to see Clyde, I told them I did, that so long as Clyde and I lived, I would see him whenever I could, end quote. And here we are, the day, May 23rd, 1934. We're caught in a trap. You can't walk out. Texas and Louisiana police had it up to here with Bonnie and Clyde and whatever minion might be with them. Frank Hamer, former Texas Ranger, B.M. Galt, highway patrolman, and Ted Hinton and Bob Alcorn with the Dallas County Sheriff's Office set and sprung the trap. Hamer had been doing his homework. He researched the highways that Bonnie and Clyde seemed to often take. He had been watching their activities for weeks. The pair's hideout at Black Lake had been watched for 2 months. Several weeks ago, law enforcement had just missed the couple and decided that they were going to adopt the policy of sitting and waiting. That morning of May 23rd, Hamer and 3 Texas Rangers had picked up the trail in Bossier Parish, following Clyde's car to Bienville Parish, where the Rangers were then joined by Sheriff Jordan and deputies. Officers somehow got ahead of Clyde and lay in wait, armed to the hilt, waiting for Clyde and Bonnie. Finally, Clyde's car broke over the horizon, racing at 85 miles per hour. As the car approached, an officer yelled out, "Halt!" As Clyde and Bonnie reached for their guns instead of stopping and surrendering, they were met by dozens of Law guns. The car smashed into an embankment, and Law continued to fire until the car and the pair's bodies had been absolutely riddled with bullets. Bonnie's body was practically doubled over in the passenger seat, a machine gun in her lap. Clyde was in the driver's seat behind the steering wheel, still clutching a revolver in one hand. The bodies were to be taken to Arcadia, some 17 miles east. In the car were 3 Army rifles, 2 sawed-off automatic shotguns, a machine gun, a dozen pistols, and large amounts of ammo. There were some sandwiches in a bag from a sandwich shop in Arcadia. Hamer would say, quote, "We killed Clyde Barrow and Bonnie at 9:15 this morning. They were at Black Lake, a hideout we had been watching for weeks. Clyde and Bonnie did not get to fire a shot. Their car was full of guns and ammunition, but they did not get a chance to use them." End quote. A quote I didn't see until June from him would be, quote, "I can tell you what happened. We just shot the devil out of them." End quote. How did Law even know generally where Bonnie and Clyde were? Sheriff Jordan of Bienville Parish said that he had received a tip that the First National Bank in Arcadia was due to be robbed soon. With that news, he contacted Texas Law. The couple had arrived the afternoon before and drove through Gibbsland, Louisiana in the afternoon, and also earlier this morning. Clyde's mother cried out when she got the news and said, quote, "And I prayed only last night that I might see him alive again just once more," end quote. Bonnie's mother, Emma Parker, fainted when she received the news by telephone and also had a hard time believing it. Mrs. Billy Mace, Bonnie's sister, would quietly say, quote, "I'm not surprised. I've been expecting it to end this way," end quote. Note that she's been in prison for weeks, as police believe she had something to do with the deaths of the officers in Grapevine. Billy would say she had been home taking pictures that afternoon as it was Easter Sunday. We'll talk more about this later. On the same day, J. Edgar Hoover, director of the Justice Department's Division of Investigation, aka FBI, would make a speech about the danger of pardons and paroles. Quote, "When confirmed, bloodthirsty criminals are set at liberty to prey upon society, to kill not only the sworn protectors of communities, but to murder and kidnap respectable citizens in various parts of the country. It would seem to be time that some thought be given to the flagrant abuses of the pardon and parole power. This country can just as well do without the glorification of such hardened criminals as John Dillinger, Machine Gun Kelly, Harvey Bailey, and Clyde Barrow. The effect of the glorification of such types of humanity as these individuals may become all too painfully obvious when the present generation of American youngsters reaches maturity." End quote. This is a weird thing, but this reminded me of an episode of The Brady Bunch, when Bobby becomes obsessed with the outlaw Jesse James, until he meets an older gentleman who tells Bobby about some relative of his, I'm sorry, I don't remember who had been murdered by Jesse James, that James was not a hero, that the movies Bobby watched about this man had been censored or changed to hide the real tragedies Jesse James had committed. So it's interesting to think about that show and to hear Hoover's words about how sometimes these criminals get glorified in the media and by people. Mrs. E.B. Wheeler, widow of one of the highway patrolmen who had been killed in Grapevine, Texas, Easter Sunday, would sigh and say, "Thank God," when she heard the news. John Abney of Gibbsland would witness the transportation of Bonnie and Clyde's bodies in the car. Yes, the officers had left the bodies in the so-called death car. This is a little bit graphic. Quote, "The officers brought the bodies through here about 11:30. They had just left the bodies in the car and tied it to another car and hauled it to Arcadia. Bonnie Parker's head was almost shot off, and it just dangled. Barrow was badly shot up. There must have been 15 or 20 bullet holes in the windshield of the car. The sides of the car were just peppered full of holes. Several people here noticed Barrow's car in the last 3 or 4 days. It was an almost new car and was sandy in color. It had an Arkansas license and a big trunk on the back. The officers had automatic rifles, sawed-off shotguns, and pistols. The officers had been hiding along the road since 3 o'clock this morning, and I heard an ex-convict had tipped them off that Barrow was coming this way. The ex-convict went out in the road to flag the car, and when Barrow reached for his gun, that's when the officers fired. End quote. Now, I'm not sure if it was an ex-convict that yelled halt. I read it was a law officer. Blanche Barrow, who is Clyde's sister-in-law and is also an inmate at the Missouri State Prison, would say, quote, "I'm glad they were both killed. It was the easiest way out." End quote. Blanche is the wife of Marvin Barrow. She was with Marvin when he received the wounds that would eventually kill him, as they had both been captured near Dexter, Iowa. Quote, "I'm glad it's all over. It is much better that they were both killed rather than to have been taken alive." End quote. May 24th. After the bodies were taken to Arcadia, they are now in Dallas awaiting burial. Apparently before that, the public was allowed to view the pair's bodies in the morgue. Hamer would say, quote, "I hated to shoot a woman, but as I looked down my rifle barrel, I remembered the way in which Bonnie Parker had taken part in the murder of 9 peace officers. I remembered how she kicked the body of a highway patrolman at Grapevine, Texas, Easter Sunday, and fired a bullet into his body as he lay on the ground." End quote. May 25th. Clyde Barrow was buried on this day, Friday, next to his brother at Western Heights Cemetery. Reverend Clifford Andrews would say, quote, "Even in the worst of us, there is good, and in the best of us is something we cannot criticize others for." End quote. May 26th. Bonnie Parker, 23, was buried in the Fish Trap Cemetery on this day of Saturday in West Dallas. Not in the same cemetery as Clyde. In fact, her grave would be moved to Crown Heights Memorial Park later, still not where Clyde was buried. Anyway, wreaths decorated her gravesite, including one sent by the Barrows. Reverend Andrews, who did Clyde's service, read the 90th Psalm, which is Prayer of Moses, and would say that he, quote, "loved Bonnie because God loved her. From what I have heard, I am sure that deep down in her heart, this young lady had a yearning for a better life." End quote. About 100 of her friends and relatives had attended the private services earlier at the funeral chapel. Police overseeing all services to make sure there was no disorder, as several hundreds of people had hung around outside the chapel. Billy Mace, 21, sister of Bonnie, fainted when she saw Bonnie's body. She was allowed that, but remember, she's still being held in prison for the murder of the Grapevine law enforcement, pending ballistic testing that still needs to be done. She was not allowed to go to the cemetery and was returned to Fort Worth. This all came about because a farmer identified Billy as the one who shot 2 officers on the roadside near his home. And he's emphatic about it. But could he have seen Bonnie instead? You know, sisters, both had reddish hair. Anyway, just to let you know, eventually she would be cleared of those particular charges. Souvenirs? Anyone? Sheriff Jordan of Bienville Parish, Louisiana, is so far refusing to turn over the guns of the couple, one which had notches, to Texas law, and also plans to keep the so-called death car. However, that car had been stolen by Clyde from one Jesse Warren of Topeka, you know, the one who actually owns it. Agents for Mr. Warren went down south to go get the car, but the agents were told by the sheriff that he would keep the car and pay Warren for it. Warren, as you can imagine, has already been offered 40-plus different offers for the car and would not find the sheriff's offer satisfactory. May 28th. A letter from Clyde to Raymond Hamilton, you know, former crime bestie, would reveal that Clyde and Bonnie wanted to wipe out the yellow rat Hamilton. Hamilton, as we last saw, was caught again and back in prison, possibly waiting the death penalty. In April, Hamilton had received this letter while in prison. Clyde would say in the letter, which was actually handwritten by Bonnie but signed by Clyde, quote, "I hope this will serve the purpose of letting you know that you can never expect the least sympathy or assistance from me. The purpose of this letter is to remind you of all the dirty deals you have pulled. You exposed your whole card when you stole the money from us on the Lancaster job. That's what I have my rear vision mirror for, to watch suspicious people. When I demanded a shakedown, you offered such strange excuses for having the money on you. I should have killed you then. I would have saved myself much bother and money looking for you. For after you writing that letter saying you didn't stoop so low as to rob filling stations, I have done nothing but look for you. Should I have found you, you wouldn't have had a chance to give up. You couldn't stand the rift of the outlaw life. I don't claim to be too smart. I know that someday they will get me, but it won't be without resistance. You only carried your guns around to show off, or else kidnap women and children." End quote. Henry Methvin, one of the Huntsville escapees and a traveler on some of the more recent travels of Bonnie and Clyde, is still missing. He was subpoenaed as a witness in Billy Mace's Grapevine trial, but is a no-show. If he could testify, he was allegedly with the pair at the time and could say that Billy was not there. Again, she would eventually be exonerated. May 31st. Clyde's mom was arrested last night after she went to the theater, which happened to be showing a newsreel of the death scene of her son and Bonnie, shouting, quote, "You can't do that to my boy," end quote. She apparently screamed this more than once, theater personnel grabbing her and took her outside, where she proceeded to grab and throw down the placards advertising the newsreel and was arrested by police. Ma'am, why did you go in if you knew that's what they would show? I mean, I do get it, though. Maybe she thought she could handle it. I really don't know. June 13th. Hamilton is in Huntsville awaiting the electric chair. He wants a district court to set aside the death penalty given him in the very recent trial for the death of Huntsville prison guard Major Crowson, and for him to get a new trial. He wasn't the only one charged with this. Joe Palmer was also, but I haven't read much about him. But then a week later, it would be reported that Joe Palmer was wanted in 4 states, captured after he had kidnapped 3 men in Iowa, but then freed them while under pursuit. When arrested, he was found carrying 2 of Clyde's automatic pistols. June 28th. Palmer is already on trial for the death of Major Crowson. Also, Sheriff Jordan had to give over the death card to the feds, namely U.S. Marshal George W. Montgomery. From what I understand, the original owners, the Warrens of Topeka, had to go to court to get it back. They would note in the 26 days that Bonnie and Clyde had possession of their car. Bonnie and Clyde had driven 7,500 miles. The Warrens got it back in August 1934, but would eventually sell it for a tiny sum of money, and you'll see what happened with that later. July 1st. Joe Palmer had been tried and convicted of murder of Major Crowson, got the death penalty. He is going to fight it. July 28th. Some information about Frank Hamer, former captain of the Texas Rangers, rivaling Wyatt Earp, who was known as the deadliest frontier marshal of the Old West. Hamer has been at the deaths of 53 outlaws, and on his own pistol are 17 notches, and apparently there are more killings than that. He stands 6'4", much taller than Wyatt Earp, but it's said that they both have the same disposition. El Democrata del Condado de Costilla newspaper, July 28, 1934. Quote, "Earp never fought unless he had to. Neither does Captain Hamer. Both are renowned for their avoidance of publicity. Earp wore dark clothes and never adorned his person with colored bandanas and fancy vests of the Old West. Captain Hamer dresses like a Texas businessman, but both are noted for having their guns always ready for action." End quote. When asked what he was going to do next, remember Disney World and Disneyland do not exist yet, Hamer would say, quote, "I've been up for 90 hours, and I like to take the rest of the afternoon off, but I'll be ready for work in the morning." End quote. August 18th, 1934. Apparently a song was released called Bluebird regarding the life history of Bonnie and Clyde, and their parents are collectively trying to keep the record from being sold. August 24th, 1934, Joe Palmer escaped prison July 22nd. He was caught in Paducah, Kentucky, and will be returning back home. To his Huntsville prison cell home. December 11th, 1934. Baby brother of Clyde Barrow has gone on trial for a robbery of a drugstore, the jury being told not to consider his relationship to his brother Clyde. December 18th, 1934. At a fair in Houston, mothers of Bonnie and Clyde decided to give a talk on why crime doesn't pay. Allegedly, 100,000 women asked city officials to put a stop to it, as they didn't consider these particular women fit to tell the public how to prevent crime. Per the Times News. Quote, the basis of the plea of Texas women was that they did not consider the mothers of the dead outlaws were fitted to instruct the public in crime prevention or control. There is logic in the argument. The two women certainly did not make a success in the rearing of their own children. They may see very clearly now that crime does not pay. What a pity they failed to get that lesson across to Clyde Barrow and Bonnie Parker. End quote. February 22, 1935. 24 people were indicted on charges of harboring and concealing Bonnie and Clyde during the days, weeks, months that the pair was driving through 7 states as they did crime. Raymond Hamilton is at large. He and his brother Floyd got away from police who had trapped them in Dallas. Floyd was caught at a bus station in Shreveport, and he is one of the 24. Other members of the 24 are the moms of Clyde and Bonnie, plus Clyde's brother, Buck Marvin, who is dead, and Elsie, who is in a state penitentiary. Mary O'Dare, Raymond Hamilton's sweetheart of some sort. So yeah, Raymond, due to be put to death at some point, but somehow he escaped along with an unknown number of other convicts. He's been robbing small banks and had just robbed one in Carthage, Texas, when he was caught in the Dallas police trap, but escaped. February 26, 1935. 15 relatives and friends of Bonnie and Clyde were convicted on charges of conspiracy to harbor fugitives of justice. An additional 5 had pled guilty. Of the 15, the pair's ma's said the reason they did it was mother love. Henry Methvin, a year and a day in a Fed penitentiary. Bonnie's ma was given 30 days in jail. Floyd Hamilton, brother of Raymond, received 2 years in Leavenworth. Mrs. Davis, Raymond and Floyd Hamilton's ma, was given 30 days. Billy Mace, Bonnie's sister, was given a year and a day in Alderson Prison. Mary O'Dare, Raymond's girl, year and a day in Alderson Prison. She was one that had pled guilty. Blanche Barrow, the wife of Clyde's brother Marvin / Buck, a year and a day. She had also pled guilty. Clyde's ma, oddly, was allowed to fix her own sentence, and she gave herself 30 days in jail. W.H. Bybee, one of Clyde's gangster buds, 90 days. There were more, but these are the characters we've heard some about. April 6, 1935. Raymond, 22 years old, was recaptured in a Fort Worth railroad yard after being out and about for a while, and it's likely he will be put to death within 30 days back in Huntsville. May 10, 1935. Raymond Hamilton and Joe Palmer would both die in the electric chair in Huntsville Prison. And the death car goes on tour. Remember, the original owners, the Warrens, had gotten it back, but then sold it for a nice chunk of change. Here's what the car is up to. 1957. A movie was released called Killers All. The parents were encouraged to take their problem children to. From the Arkansas State Press, January 18, 1957. Quote, never before has a motion picture revealed such facts as this one. The much discussed question of, was Bonnie Parker a love slave to Clyde Barrow? What possessed her to follow Clyde Barrow in his murderous adventures and killings throughout the country? Why was she a sweetheart to that type of criminal? What fascination was there in literally living with him in a Ford automobile and being his gun girl companion throughout all his exploits? No boy or girl could help but stop and think after seeing their bitter sufferings, terrific hardships, poignant sorrows, and dishonorable deaths. End quote. So, I believe the cemetery that Clyde is burying in is private and marked as no trespassing. They have had it open to visitors on the death anniversary before, but I don't know how often. I guess if you would like to visit, I would call the caretaker. Where Bonnie is buried seems to be open during normal hours. If you'd like to see the death car, it's currently at Buffalo Bill's Resort and Casino in Primm, Nevada, on display 24 hours a day for free. They apparently also have Clyde's death shirt. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. I admit I learned quite a lot about their exploits prior to getting shot down, which was really about all I knew of it. See you!